Hello and welcome. This is Ricky Schoonover with 8Z Real Estate and host of this podcast, the Denver Homes Market Report. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. We are in our 6th season. We are on our episode 11. We have one more episode to go. That's going to be in March. And we'll close out. We'll open up in April with a whole new season, season 7 for that. All right, so let's recap a little bit about what we talked about in our previous episode in January. We were closing the book on 2025. We were opening up the page for 2026. And we kind of went through the numbers on where we were as a market a little bit. And the biggest thing was, we had two different kind of realities for 2005. We had a lot of sellers who felt their home was worth more than what the market was telling them it was worth, or what the market was willing to pay at that time. And that didn't come without conditioning, right? We had been in a seller's market for over a decade, about 2013, 14. If you bought a home, 2013 till about 2022, 23, if you bought a home, held onto it for any period of time, it was worth more money than what you bought it for. That was just bottom line. So it kind of conditions that thinking, right? That way of thinking. And then we hit reality check in 2005 when pretty soon your home wasn't worth as much as maybe it was. It had gone down a little bit, about 5 to 10%, maybe a little more in some areas, a little less in others, but about 5 to 10%. We're talking about Denver metro area here, of course. And then on the buyer's side, buyers are just kind of waiting in 25, right? 2025, waiting for something, waiting for homes to be more affordable, waiting for interest rates to come down, waiting for a crash, waiting for something to happen to make homes more affordable. And what the market did is just a little bit of both. A little bit of both, kind of stayed balanced. Prices on the homes come down about 5, 10%. Interest rates are the real story, right? Because in 2024, they were about 7, 8%. Then 2025, they were like 6, 7%. And now here we are going into 2026, and we're about high 5s, low 6s. So the interest rates have steadily come down in the last 3 years. And the price of homes in the last year or so have just come down about 5, 10%. So we kind of balanced that out just a little bit. Inventory was the big story, but really we had 23,000 homes in January last year of 2025 as we kicked off from 2024, kicking off into 2025. And then this year we had 21,000. So you got 21,000 homes available to choose from to purchase, and the prices have come down about 5 to 10%. And the interest rates have steadily come down to now we're in the high 5s and low 6s. And it's kind of funny about the interest rates because I have a great lender partner, Jaxanne Riggs, and I'll ask her a lot of times, like, hey, Jaxanne, where's the interest rates at right now? And she'll kind of chuckle at me and say, Ricky, how much does a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Denver cost? And it's just because there's a lot of variables, right? And if you're talking about the house price, it depends on where you're going to buy it in Denver. It could be a lot of places. Some places the houses might be a 3-bedroom, 2-bath might cost you $1 million, and there's other parts of town where they might cost you $450,000. So it just depends on what part of town. And same thing with interest rates. It really is an individual thing. There's so many factors, there's so many variables that go into that, like your credit score, your credit history, what kind of loan you're using, what's your down payment, things like that. So, anyways. Just in general, high 5s, low 6s, that's where the interest rates are about right now. Now, we just had the Feds meet. Feds did not touch the rates, so we're kind of be stagnant on our rates for right now at that high 5, low 6s. So no big story there. But the one story that I did wake up to that I thought was interesting, I thought I would share with you today, is I turned on the TV, we were looking at the financial news, and S&P opened up, or slightly after opening, went to 7,000. And I looked over at my husband and I was like, you know what? I think when I was in high school, the S&P was like 2,000. So how did it go from 2,000 to 7,000 in all these years? That's crazy. Then I started Googling it, looking it up, and I was like, oh, you know what? It wasn't 2,000 back in, I graduated high school in 89. So we're talking about 87, 88 when I was taking that course, economics course or whatever it was. And we were kind of practicing with the stock market. The S&P was 200. So 200 back in like 86, 87. And then we had, or 87, 88. Then we had a little crash in 89 and it was 700 and then it come down to 200 when the little crash came. So it was like 89, it was like 200, but it had been like 600 or 700 before. Then we went through the 2000s and it gone all the way up in like 2007 or 2008 up to about 1,500. And then when that market meltdown, financial meltdown of 2008 hit, it dropped from 1,500 to about 700. So almost 50% drop. And then steadily from there, it kind of climbed up. And now here we are at 7,000. So I thought that was pretty remarkable. And I wanted to bring up another thing that kind of like gave me a segue, kind of like made me think of something else. And so what I'm going to talk about in depth today is generational wealth. Because you hear a lot of the younger generation, And I don't blame the younger generation. I'm 55 now, so I'm not part of the younger generation, but I do have clients that run the gambit, whether they're in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So I hear from everybody. And the one thing about, the younger generation talking about is we can't afford a home. Prices of our goods and services, insurances and everything else has gone up. And there's no doubt, that is 100% true. There's no disputing that. It's more expensive today than, back in the 80s or back in the 90s. It's gotten more expensive. It's getting harder to buy homes, getting harder to do things like that. Homes are more expensive and our wages have not really kept up. So that's a big concern. And, something's got to push, right? Something's got to push a shove. And so I started thinking about it. It's like, you hear a lot about boomers, right? I'm not quite a boomer. I think I don't know all those numbers. I don't know all those different generations. But anyway, I was born in the 70s. So wherever that puts me, that puts me. But my thought process on this was, the boomers are getting up there in age. They're 65, 70. And, as sad as it might be, we're losing them. And we're losing them at record numbers. They're getting up to being 65 or 70 or even 80, up to that age point where we're starting to pass away just by age. Well, if they hold all the wealth, if they have all this massive amounts of money, they can't take it with them. Wherever they go, when they leave Earth, they can't take it with them. So that generational wealth, I feel, is going to, and probably already is already now being passed down to the next generation. And it's going to be the largest transfer of wealth, the largest transfer of folks that are getting up to their age from the boomers that have this massive amounts of wealth that are going to be passing that down to their heirs, whether that be their nieces, nephews, children, whatever it is. But that money that's been tied up with boomers, whether that's in their real estate assets or their 401ks or wherever that money is, wherever they've kind of parked it for these years, you always hear about these boomers having all the money that they had these generations where it was easier, it seemed, to make money and to generate wealth. And so now they've got all this wealth and they're older, but they're starting to age out. And as they do pass away, I know it's kind of morbid to talk about this, but as they do pass away, that money's got to go somewhere. And that money is going to go to the heirs of those boomers. So you're going to see, and we're probably already seeing it, is this huge shift of generational wealth. Now this doesn't mean it's going to be equitable, right? It doesn't mean it's going to go to everybody. It's going to go to their heirs. So the folks that had boomers, a family that were wealthy, are going to now be receiving that money or receiving those benefits. And now that money will go to them. And you're just going to see this huge shift. And I haven't seen it quite yet. I haven't heard a lot of younger people talking about it yet. And it's one of those things, right? You may not hear about it as much. When it's really hard and it's hard to buy a home and everything else, you hear more about it. When we're talking about affordability and how am I going to purchase a home? They've gone up so much and our wages have not followed. And that's all very true. But then when you do inherit a bit of money and you do go to buy a home, I don't think you're going to be on social media talking about it quite as much. I mean, you might post a picture and say, hey, congratulations, we bought a home. But we're not going to be talking about it in the same context. Like, well, wow, now we have this huge generational shift where the money that was with the boomers, they're passing away, they're giving it out to their heirs. And now we have this transfer of generational wealth to the next generation. So I don't think there's a lot of people talking about that yet, and I don't see it yet in the news, but I've been talking about it here and there with some of my colleagues and some of my clients, and especially my younger clients, and trying to show that to them. Like, they may not have rich, wealthy parents or grandparents or whatever, but as a nation as a whole, I see that as being a thing. Now, we'll see if that all pans out. I don't know how that'll work, but it's just kind of a thought, kind of a theory. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you're on my YouTube channel, if you hit subscribe right there, or it might be right there, hit that subscribe button. And then there's a spot on there you can make comments. If you are a younger generation and you have received, or perhaps you have a grandfather or a grandmother or parents, whatever it is, that have a large amount of wealth, I would just like to hear, like, is that a real thing? Is there a such thing that our older generation is now going to be passing down that wealth to our younger generation? Now, my parents, they didn't have any money. They didn't have any money when we were growing up. They didn't have any money when they passed away. There was no life insurances, nothing like that. So for me, it didn't count. But I think there'll be a lot of people out there that right now are maybe a little younger, maybe younger than me, probably in their 40s or maybe in their 30s, where they have grandparents that are boomers and they're getting up to that age. And sadly, if they pass away, I wonder if that generational wealth will start flowing down to the next generation and what that will look like. It's just a thought. I don't know. It's kind of a morbid thing to talk about, but it is a real thing because you hear so much about affordability and the prices of goods and services and insurance and, everything. It's just everything's more expensive. And I know some things have kind of softened a little bit. We talk about individual, consumer items and gas and things like that. But overall, it's still very expensive to make a living and even tread water, much less get ahead. It's just difficult. So anyway, wanted to bring that up a little bit and talk about that generational wealth transfer. Folks that are older and they're going to be passing away. I mean, it's just a part of life. But as they do, they can't take that money with them. It's got to go somewhere. It's going to go to their heirs. It's going to flow down to the next generation. And when that starts happening, or if it's already starting to happen, I would love to have that conversation and talk about it. Maybe have somebody that, maybe have a little focus group where some people have family members that are older family members that are wealthy. And then folks like me, where I have older family members where they didn't have any wealth. Anyways, just wanted to kind of throw that out there and see your thoughts on it. Make some comments on YouTube. And I would love to look at the comments and see what everyone else is talking about as far as that's concerned. All right. So we're going to wrap up the podcast a little bit early today. But before I go, let's talk about next season, because we do have March next month. So we'll talk about March. We'll have our 12th episode. Not quite sure what the content will be just yet. I do have a listing coming up. I can't pitch it yet, but I do have a listing coming up. So we'll be talking about my listing. It's going to be right here in the Arts District on Santa Fe. Historic building, beautiful building. Down in the main level is offices and workshops, and could be a gym, could be, if you're an artist, could be artist studio. If you're a photographer, it could be a photography studio, things like that on the first level. And then it's got this massive staircase that goes up, custom staircase, and you get upstairs, and then you've got a couple of bedrooms, couple bathrooms, kitchen. It's got a library. It's got an entertainment room. Really a gorgeous property right here in the Arts District on Santa Fe. And it's about 4,500 square feet, so a pretty good sized property. Very historic, built in the late 1800s. So on my next episode, we'll talk more about that. It's coming soon. It'll be launched live in the middle of February, and then in March for my next podcast, I will be able to disclose the address and talk about the price and everything else. So we'll get into that on the next episode. But the other thing I want to talk about before I close out is when we start the new season. So we're going to start a new season in April. And I'm going to go back. If you've been with me a long time, you know what I used to do. I would research different parts of town, different neighborhoods, whether it be the historic neighborhood of Baker or Park Hill, North Park Hill, South Park Hill, talk about the history of those two, or the Arts District on Santa Fe, La Alma, Lincoln Park, as we're really known. I would go to those neighborhoods and I'd really do some research, really dive deep into like the history and where they came from and the different generations or different demographics over the years that had lived in these areas, things like that. And then I would bring them to the podcast and talk to you about it. And we'd go over specific areas. I know I did Congress Park one time. I know Park Hill, La Alma, Lincoln Park, of course. Baker, we talked about that. Jefferson Park, I think, was one of my first ones. Was the neighborhood of Jefferson Park was one of my very first ones, because I remember Sexy Pizza. I don't know if they're still there. I've had this podcast going for 6 years now, so I don't know if Sexy Pizza is still there. But I remember thinking that was pretty funny that they had a place in Jefferson Park called Sexy Pizza. So anyway, I'm going to go back and start doing that a little bit, doing a little history on the neighborhoods. That'll be starting up in April. So if you're a fan of the show already, hopefully you'll stick with me and you'll like the little history of the different neighborhoods. I welcome your feedback. Give me a call if you have any questions. If you're thinking about buying or selling a home, go to my website, denverhomesmarket.com. Check that out. Scroll down about halfway down the page, and I've got a whole section in there where I've got one section for sellers, I've got one section for buyers, and then I've got a mortgage calculator. So go on there, denverhomesmarket.com, and then scroll down and then check those sections out. They're pretty cool. And then go into the featured neighborhoods. I've got a bunch of different neighborhoods that you can just click on there and it'll show you all the homes available in that particular neighborhood. So check that as well, the listings there and the neighborhoods there. All right. Other than that, we're going to close out for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, any direct questions, feel free to give me a text or give me a call. My phone number is 720-688-5110. And you've been tuned in to the Denver Homes Market Report. My name is Ricky Schoonover, and I'm with 8Z Real Estate, local Denver realtor. And thank you for tuning in to the podcast today.